The gospel reading from today is one of the parables of Jesus, and it is known as the parable of the persistent widow. How do you like that title? Most people, even people who are not religious, know Jesus' parables, like the parable of the Good Samaritan. They know the parable of the prodigal son. But the parable of the persistent widow, not so much. And I think that's because it's a very confusing story, and it's often misunderstood. As we just heard, it's about a widow who keeps badgering a judge, an unjust judge, to hear her case. And the judge finally gives in because he's just so tired of hearing her nagging. Now, I, for many years, struggled with this parable of Jesus's. It really bothered me because I thought to myself, is Jesus really comparing God to an unjust judge who doesn't care about people? And is Jesus really suggesting that whining and nagging is the best way to get God's attention and to get our needs met? It just doesn't compute with everything else I know about what Jesus said about God and about prayer. But this is one of Jesus' parables. It's one of his teachings. So it does require our attention. One of the things that I notice about this parable that is in no other parable of Jesus's is that the writer tells us what the lesson is before getting to the actual story. The writer says, right at the beginning, Jesus is telling his disciples about the importance of praying consistently and never giving up. And then he gets into the story. And maybe the writer of Luke's gospel is trying to make sure that this story is not misunderstood, because it is confusing. Now, many of you know that Jesus' disciples were often very confused by his teachings. It doesn't mean that Jesus was a bad teacher. He wasn't. We know just the opposite. Jesus was an amazing teacher. And he knew the importance of using stories to tell his teachings. Stories are easy for people to remember. Remember, Jesus never wrote anything down. His apostles never wrote anything down. These stories were written decades after Jesus' death. So maybe things changed a little bit. But Jesus knew that stories stayed in people's heads. The word parable comes from the Latin word parabola. And I'm sure many of you know parabola from your geometry class. It means comparison. Jesus told these stories as comparisons, as allegories. And the disciples understood that they weren't true stories. They never took them literally. They knew that these were told symbolically. So this story, taken symbolically, has a different meaning. Jesus purposely chose a widow as the person in this story. Now, literally, we know a widow is a woman whose husband has died. She has lost her security system. In Jesus' day, a woman who lost her husband, she had no security. But the word widow, metaphysically, or symbolically, or spiritually, means one who has lost God. One who has lost their spiritual security, their spiritual support system. We often hear that we need to pray for widows and orphans. And taken literally, yes, it is nice to pray for women whose husbands have died and children who have lost their parents. But really what that command means spiritually is to pray for people who have lost God as their support. People who feel orphaned by God, abandoned by God. Many of us in our lives have felt spiritually widowed and spiritually orphaned. All of us have gone through that. God, where are you? Why aren't you listening to my pleas? Why have you abandoned me? I don't feel you close. You're so distant. Where are you? of us have experienced that. And what Jesus is trying to say in this story is, don't give up. God is there. Keep praying. In those times where you feel widowed and orphaned and abandoned, keep praying. Don't give up. That's what his message is for us in today's gospel. Now, Richard Rohr, in the words of integration this morning, said something beautiful. That prayer is conscious union with God. When you consciously remember that you are united with God, that you're always connected with God, that's what prayer is. So it's for you in those times of despair to get quiet and to remember, oh, I'm not widowed or orphaned. God is right here with me. Just as we heard in our psalm this morning from the call to worship. God is always watching over me. God is always next to me. That's what prayer is. It's for us to remind ourselves of that presence. I think today on a cloudy day, some people say, we're waiting for the sun to come out. Well, the sun is out. The sun's out. And that's what it is in the times of darkness, when we feel there are clouds happening in our lives, is to remember that the light is still shining and that we are still connected to it. That's the purpose of prayer, is to remind ourselves that there is one power in the universe and we can never be separated from it, and that we're always in the flow of it, in the flow of the universe. Now, if you were here a few Sundays ago, I spoke about the universe. And I equated the universe to God. And I said how science today is proving things that Jesus said more than 2,000 years ago. Prayer is scientific. The title of this talk is The Science of Prayer. Has anyone ever equated to you that prayer is a science? Well, it is. It's just as real as the law of gravity and all the laws of the universe. You don't question their authenticity, do you? Well, prayer is just as real. Jesus knew that. Why was Jesus able to heal people of physical infirmities? Why? Because he prayed. Science today is proving that prayer heals people physically. It is showing that prayer lowers people's blood pressures, that prayer strengthens people's immune system, that prayer cures people of illness. This is not make-believe. This is science. It's real. When Jesus went off to pray, the apostles noticed that he was transfixed. Science today is showing through brain scans that people who pray and meditate, their brains are transfixed. You can go online and you can look at brain scans of people who pray and meditate every day and people who don't. And you will see a vast difference. Jesus knew that prayer was a science, and he applied that science. And because of that, he was able to become a living prayer. He was able to heal. Now, in the talk on the universe a couple of Sundays ago, I said that science today, astronomer Carl Sagan said, you are made of star stuff, that the entire universe dwells within you, and that you are the way for the universe to know itself. And I said, no offense to Carl Sagan, but Jesus said that same exact thing 2,000 years ago. Jesus said, you are the light of the world. You're made of star stuff. Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. The universe dwells within you. And Jesus said, you are the way for God to know itself. You are the sons and daughters of God. The same exact thing. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus gave us the instructions to pray. Jesus gave us the instructions for us to become living prayers, for us to heal, for us to become transformed through this science. But we didn't listen to it. We were taught a different way to pray. From when we were little kids, we were told, get on your knees, press your hands together. Do you know people who get on their knees and press their hands together? They're begging and pleading. We were taught to go to God begging and pleading. God, please, let me get an A on my test. God, please let me get a puppy. And although we no longer pray for A's on our tests or puppies, we're still praying as beggars and pleaders. God, please let mom get better. God, please let my daughter get a job. Did you ever see Jesus begging and pleading? Was he on his knees going, God, please let my friend Lazarus rise from the dead. God, please heal that blind man. He didn't do that. That's not how he prayed. That's not how prayer works. What did Jesus do? He gave thanks to God. He was the living prayer. And he said, it is done to you as you believe. He knew he didn't need to beg and plead because it was God's good pleasure to give us the kingdom. That we didn't need to use words because God knows our needs without our even asking. But we're still pleaders. It is why I am bothered when I watch the news after a storm and I hear people say, we were on our knees praying to God for our house to be spared from the hurricane, and it was, thank you, God. And I think there were people who were also praying just as hard, and their house was destroyed, and maybe even someone in their life died. And they're watching that thinking what? Thinking God is a judge, and that some people's prayers are listened to, and others aren't. Some people are more deserving, and some aren't. I guess that's the case if you think of God as a judge. If you think of God as a judge, then you must think prayer is presenting your case to the judge. God, may I approach the bench? God, listen, I am such a good person. What's happening to me is so unfair. You know, I go to church every Sunday. I'm a really good person. This shouldn't be happening to me. Please hear my case. That's how a lot of people pray. That's what they're trying to do, is influence the judge, curry favor with God. It doesn't work that way. That's not the science of prayer. That's someone who feels like God is a judge and God isn't a judge. God is all love and the universe is totally impartial. Father Richard Rohr said this morning, in our words of integration, the purpose of prayer isn't to get anything. It isn't to get anywhere. You're already totally in the presence of God. Prayer is just for you to get still and remember it. To remember that you are already in God's arms. That you are already in that one power and that one presence. You're in it already. You just forgot. That's why you're worried and fearful. That's why you're living in lack and limitation, because you forgot that this one power, this one presence is in the universe, and it's also within you. You just forgot it, and prayer is just a way for you to remember it. To remember that you are always in the flow. Now, science also tells us that everything is energy. Everything. That there's one energy field, one mind, one consciousness. Your thoughts and feelings are energy. Now, some of you know that song by Lucille Olson that says, our thoughts are prayers, and we are always praying. Our thoughts are prayers. Listen to what you're saying. Your thoughts emit a vibration. They send an energy out into the universe. You're always thinking, so you're always praying. Your thoughts are prayers. So, if you're a person in worry, fear, anxiety, lack, limitation, if that's what your thoughts are, that's the energy you're admitting out. And because of the laws of the universe, that's the energy you will attract. So people who live in lack often wonder why they're still living in lack. Because they're still praying lack. This is their prayer. God, please help me. I need to pay my bills. Please, I need a job. I need money. You're emitting lack. You're emitting the energy of fear. So what do you think the universe is going to give back to you? This is what the prayer is. Loving God, thank you. Thank you for the unique gifts that you have given to me. I am so ready to use them in service of you. And notice, the hands aren't clasped. They're open. I'm ready to receive. That's a prayer of love. That's a prayer of thanksgiving. That's a prayer of trust. When you emit that energy, the laws of the universe give you back that. It's science. It's how it works. Jesus knew that. He applied it in his own life, and he was trying to teach us to do it. And unfortunately, we grew up hearing differently. That God was a judge that we needed to get down on our knees and beg to in order to get what we need, instead of understanding that it's God's great pleasure to give it to you. But you have to be open to receive it. Fear, lack, limitation block the flow. You're not in the flow of the universe. The purpose of prayer isn't to change God's mind. The purpose of prayer is to align yourself with it, to become one with it. It's not to change the flow of the universe. The purpose of prayer is to get yourself in the flow of the universe. That's what prayer is. Now, Father Richard Rohr actually says in our words of integration this morning that the prayer of silence is really the more authentic prayer, more than the prayer of words. And Jesus said the same thing in Matthew 6, verse 7. Jesus says, don't pray like so many people. They use all of these words. They babble on as if by saying all of these words, they're going to be more easily heard by God. He says, don't pray that way. Don't pray that way. Jesus said, when you pray, pray in secret. Go off by yourself. Shut the door, he says. Be still and know. You don't have to use words. You just have to be still and remember that God is with you. God is within you. And allow God to work through you. Now, I know many of us go to prayer when we are fearful, when we're worried, when we're experiencing lack. That's when we go to prayer. And that's okay. But the purpose of prayer is to transform that. That's why Jesus became transformed, transfixed when he prayed. That's what prayer does to us. It transforms our fears. It transforms our worries into trust and into love. So, we are going to be approaching very soon the Advent season. Advent is a time of preparation for the birth of the light in us. I am introducing this whole idea of prayer today, and Mark Anthony Lord will speak to us about it next month, because I want all of us to make a commitment during Advent to pray without ceasing each day. Now you might say, how do you pray without ceasing? Well, if you're a person who thinks that prayer is words, then yes, that would be hard. It would be hard to be saying words 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in prayer. Obviously, the Bible is not suggesting we do that. Prayer is conscious union with God. I'm asking during the season of Advent, can you be mindful that God is with you throughout your day, 24/7? And your feelings are a good way to notice whether you are in it or not. What I mean is, if you find yourself worried or panicked or fearful, you're not in the flow. You're not connected to the light, because God is love. So if you're not experiencing love, that means you've removed yourself from it. God's still there, the sun is still out, you removed yourself from it. So our thoughts and feelings are a good way for us to go, oh, got to get back in the zone, got to get back in the God zone, because I removed myself from it. Jesus in this parable of the persistent widow is saying, be persistent, because the more you do it, the easier it gets. Those of you who have had a consistent prayer practice for many years, you know what I'm talking about. You find it very easy now to get to a place of peace where other people are walking around so stressful. So let us be people approaching the Advent season, committed to becoming people of prayer, committed to finding time in our day to be still, to be silent, to place ourselves in that one power and that one presence that lives within the universe and that lives within us. God, the good, omnipotent. Namaste.